Greetings and bienvenue. Hello, everybody. It is October 31st, Halloween, as I'm recording this. It's been a few days now since the Brothers War story concluded, and I figured I've had enough time to digest it, so now here I am giving you all my thoughts on the story, my review. So, before we begin, let me take a step back and put you all into the mindset of Lore Seeker as he started reading this story. At the very beginning, The Brothers War, the novel, the original novel, and its follow-ups, The Planeswalker Cycle, are some of my favorite entries in the Magic's compendium. I enjoyed them greatly when I first read them, and when I recently reread them about a year ago, I still greatly enjoyed them. With that in mind, my hopes were high, very high, that this story would finally be good in terms of recent Magic lore. Meanwhile, WotC's performance for recent lore has been abysmal, so understandably my expectations were low. As you're aware by now, I have stopped reading stories on the channel, if only because, more often than not, I find myself grievously disappointed, not just by the stories itself, but by the reception. I often feel like reading them isn't worth the effort. So, I often just have this really negative attitude towards newer stories, but I'm pleased to say that the story itself for Brothers War manages to come in somewhere in between my expectations, my high hopes for the story and my very low expectations for it. It wasn't nearly as good as I wanted it to be, not by any metric, but it also wasn't an absolute travesty like Dominaria United or Kaldheim or Strixhaven. There's a lot to say about the story, so I will go over what I liked about it, what I disliked, and then I will give my overall thoughts on it. And I want to start off strong and go over what I liked about the story. And to be honest, there is a lot to like in this story. Irregardless of the writing or the length of it, it's a fairly enjoyable story for a casual or dedicated Vorthos. I think there's a lot here that people will like. The first, and perhaps, in my opinion, the most, impactful is the size. This is a 10-chapter story, not a 5-chapter. Usually, for new Magic sets, stories we have 5 main chapters, and then 5 largely unrelated side chapters. Here, there's still that main/side chapter split, but both are interconnected. There is a past segment and a current day segment, and the current day segments all follow a linear story progression, and the past segments kind of jump around a bit as Teferi is kind of feeling his way through the timeline, with the exception of the very first chapter, which just kind of sets up the after epilogue of the Brothers' War with Caleb and Krug. But I thought personally that was amazing. I was like, one of my biggest complaints in recent years has always been the lack of story length, and here it felt like we had much more to work with in terms of the story, and the story flows overall very well. It can be a bit confusing when you're first diving into it, trying to figure out in what order you're supposed to read it, main versus side, or past versus present. But overall, the story flows very well. It's very easy to figure out, what's going on, who's doing what, etc. It's not crazy or convoluted like I kind of worried it would be when I first realized, they're doing a past and present kind of mix-up. I had a kind of fear that it would be a bit hard to follow for especially the more casual viewers who aren't as familiar with the Brothers' War itself and the story between Urza and Mishra, but it ended up being fine. So, let's move on. This story had a lot of fight sequences, like there was trench warfare in the past and big show-off battles against Phyrexia in the present, and I think all of the fight scenes were pretty decent. I'm not going to really comment on them a whole lot, I just want to say that I enjoyed them personally. Another thing I enjoyed was an absolute lack of retcons, or at least none that I saw that were memorable or notable. I don't think reading the story I thought to myself, man, that's a major retcon to the events of the novel. I don't think that happened at all when I was reading it, and I haven't reread the story yet. Obviously, I just don't have the time for that yet, but thinking about it, I don't think there were any major retcons to the Brothers' War, and that was a huge fear of mine going into this. I was like, oh man, they're gonna retcon the hell out of that. They're gonna make Mishra like a fucking woman. They're gonna make Urza gay. It's gonna be all kinds of crazy, but that didn't happen. None of that. The events of the Brothers' War still take place as they were. All of the past segments don't retread the events of the Brothers' War, with one small exception. They take place after the events of the novel, and I personally found that to be really, really cool of them. Giving us a bit of, not necessarily closure, but following up on the characters that we haven't seen in 20-ish years. I thought that was really nice, and I greatly enjoyed those segments in the past where we got to see, how Kayla was trying to deal with the fallout of the end of the war. So, characters in their past, speaking of, were largely respected. I mean, there is one exception, I'll get to that later, but, Kayla was largely the same. Tanos was basically the same character. We left him in the end of the war. His character progression does happen here, and there's a few others that I really enjoyed. So I thought that overall, the past segments were very enjoyable. Now, the past segments weren't the only past segments, I should say. There was, for the one Saheeli chapter, there was a flashback that involved Saheeli and her interactions with Gonti, and for the most part, I really hated Saheeli's inclusion in the story. More on that in a bit, but I really did enjoy the flashback with Gonti. Gonti's not a character we've really gotten to experience before, and I really enjoyed fleshing out Kaladesh more, and meeting this Machiavellian-ish villain, this kind of mob boss who's in need of her help and who has her patch him up under threat. I did enjoy that flashback bit. Another bit I really enjoyed, and there are a lot of chunks of the story I enjoyed, was the love letter between Ashiok and Elspeth. To think of fucking Ashiok, of all people, writing a love letter to, again, of all people, Elspeth, where he goes on about how wonderful New Phyrexia is and how the nightmares have nightmares and how he absolutely loves it there. It was great. I really enjoyed that bit. Something else I liked, Tezzeret. Tezzeret is not a character I typically think of as enjoyable, but his POV bits during this story I enjoyed them a great deal, especially his interactions with the characters around him. Through Tezzeret, we get a lot of juicy lore. For example, his interactions with Ajani, Phyrexianized Ajani, are very brief, but he has this little thought to himself, basically, man, this is the cat that Nicol Bolas was so afraid of, so on guard of, and that's the kind of thing I personally really enjoy. That's the kind of lore I really love. And him thinking that there's other planeswalkers that have been Phyrexianized, he's talking about how his former enemies are now his allies, ostensibly. That confirms to me that there are other planeswalkers we don't know about yet who have also been converted into Phyrexians. I enjoyed his interactions with Karn, who is, at this point in the story, just ahead. We learn that Karn's head detaches from his torso, and I thought that was great too. But Tezzeret's interactions with Karn, where he's trying to convince Karn to leave, and Karn explains he can't, I enjoyed that interaction. Tezzeret's interaction with Elish Nor, where he finally realizes, hey, she's playing you, and he gets kind of upset about that, and he decides, yeah, I'm going to betray these people even harder now. I liked that as well. Overall, Tezzeret was just a very enjoyable part of the story. Also, Tezzeret's inner thoughts help support my personal theory that the Planeswalker Phyrexians are basically just brainwash. Sure, that does mean the stakes are lower like a lot of people thought, but yeah, that means they can be fixed, but it's something I personally kind of hoped was going to turn out to be true anyway. I don't really necessarily like the concept of Planeswalker Phyrexians. I think they are too big of a threat in universe to really be something that can stick around permanently. Every Planeswalker Phyrexian either has to be killed permanently or fixed, and I think fixing them is not necessarily the better of the two options, but it's definitely the one that allows for better storytelling in the future, if that makes sense to you. Tezzeret isn't the only villain to get some love from me. I also greatly enjoyed the continued trend that New Phyrexia really does just want Karn to love them. The interaction between Elish Norn and Karn is a very brief one. We don't get to see much of it, but here she is trying to convince him to, hey, see Phyrexia as the perfection it is. Meanwhile, Karn's just obfuscating insanity, and she's just trying to okay, Dad, go back to the retirement home at him. I thought it was really enjoyable. I do greatly enjoy the continued theme of New Phyrexians just want Karn to love them, even if it's not really possible. The big, major interaction I enjoyed, however, was the interaction at the end of the past segments between Teferi and Urza. It's a very somber scene overall. You see, at this point in the story, Urza has just detonated the Silex. He has just destroyed Argoth. He has ended the Brothers' War. His body has been torn apart by the energies, and he's finally awakening as a planeswalker, starting a journey that would see him reach absolute insanity, vilify himself, destroy worlds, and in the end sacrifice himself to end Yawgmoth. That all starts here at this point. Meanwhile, for Teferi, he's meeting for the first time in so long someone he's largely hated and thought of as a villain for most of his life, and here we are. Teferi desperately needs Urza's help. Urza is just reaching the end of his mortal life, becoming a god, and overall I found this scene where Teferi explains to Urza, your fight's not done. I found this to be a very somber moment in the Magic story, and one that I personally enjoyed a significant amount. I really do want to emphasize how much I loved this interaction between these two. It was very great, very cool to me. I liked it. I loved it. Don't need to elaborate. But immediately afterwards, another thing I really liked is the ending of that chapter. The ending of the past segment was word for word taken from the Brothers' War novel, and I personally thought that was really, really cool. But with that ends the string of things I liked. You see, there is a lot I liked in this story. Some I liked a lot, but there's also a lot I don't like. Of course there is. I'm never perfectly happy with anything, but some of my major problems include, let's think. A problem I have, Kaya. I don't like Kaya. I don't like Kaya being pushed as this big, important character again and again. She's in so many sets. She was in Kaldheim, she was in Innistrad, and here she is again in this story being pushed as this important leader, as this person who will lead the Gatewatch in the fight against New Phyrexia. She has no qualifications. She has nothing on Phyrexia. She failed her one interaction with Phyrexians when she utterly failed to stop Vorinclex on Kaldheim. Her job there was to kill Vorinclex, and she failed utterly. And I don't understand WotC's insistence on shoving Kaya into the forefront and trying to make her this big, important character. She just doesn't have that leadership quality, and she doesn't have that endearingness to the audience, that importance. I don't like her, and I can't think of anybody who genuinely does. So I don't understand why WotC is so dead set on having her be at the front and center of this. Another character I really did not like in this story was fucking Saheeli. There's this point in the story where Saheeli is going over the schematics of this machine, the temporal anchor, and she's thinking to herself, man, the guy who designed this was a fucking idiot. And I'm like, that's fucking Urza you're talking about. This was a machine designed by Urza. In this story, they're making Saheeli out. Saheeli, keep in mind, prior to this, Saheeli was not an impressive artificer. She was okay at best in terms of what Kaladesh had to offer. Her other friend, the one who invented the planar bridge, who's I'm forgetting her name, but someone else was the one who invented the planar bridge, and she was far more impressive than Saheeli. But here we are, and Saheeli is being treated like she's better than fucking Urza, the greatest artificer to ever exist. And that really fucking pissed me off. It really, it's not a joke. I was fucking furious when I saw this. Oh yeah, Saheeli's just better than Urza. She improved on his designs. I was fucking infuriated. Also, the Gatewatch's plan, it's half-baked at best. It's doomed to fail, and I don't really quite understand what the goal here was, narratively or in universe. It's just get a bunch of planeswalkers together, attack New Phyrexia, and hope for the best. Yeah, they've got some powerhouses on their side, but also, like, some of the choices for this assault team don't fucking make sense. Like, why is Luca here? His power is that he controls wild animals. I don't think there's going to be dogs or monkeys running around on New Phyrexia for him to work with. I don't think Tyvar makes a good pick either. Tyvar's ability is that he, like, incorporates other substances into his body, right? I'm pretty sure that's how his power set works. And everything on New Phyrexia is corrupted by Phyrexian oil, so Tyvar going there is basically dooming him from the start. Like, it feels like these two in particular, Luca and Tyvar, they're being set up to fucking die. That's what it feels like. Well, why are they going? Why is Luca, who has nothing to work with, and Tyvar, who's basically going to poison himself there, why are they going? That seems like such an awful choice. Also, minor thing, but it seems like the Wanderer's planeswalking issue was solved off-screen, I guess? Oh well, let's move on. Wizards continues their trend of forgetting that Jodah is the Archmage of Dominaria and is immensely powerful. He only ever seems to be impressive as a character when it's not important. During one of the fight scenes, he's overpowered by Girl with a Stick. And I just can't grasp that. Jodah is this character who has, in the past, flipped off planeswalkers when they were gods, and here he is just not being all that impressive, except when it doesn't count, like when Jace tries to read his mind, and he can't. Whoa, Jodah's so powerful. Meanwhile, Girl with Sharp Stick stabs him. He's gonna die. It was just, I'm very disappointed. I keep hoping that Jodah will come through as this really powerful, impressive character like he had been in the past, and it's just not happening. I'm very sad by that, I guess. Another character who disappointed me, just for a bit, for the most part, I enjoyed Kayla Bin Krug as a character in the past segments. I really did largely enjoy her, but there's the point where she lets these refugees, fugitives, whatever, into her city immediately after they explain, like, hello, we are a bunch of machine-hating refugees who go from town to town asking them to destroy all robots. May we come in? And she's just like, yes, please come into our robot-infested town. Nothing can possibly go wrong. I didn't like that. I thought it was really fucking stupid. Another thing I really didn't like, there was a lot of political pandering, not like an insane amount, but there was enough being shoved into your face during some of the chunks of the story. I'm not going to dwell on it. It sucked ass. I hated that. And I'm dreadfully afraid of a repeat of Gideon's situation with Elspeth. Just like the lead up to War of the Spark with Gideon, Elspeth is being talked about like she's the greatest hope against New Phyrexia, like she's their big champion of justice and she'll fix everything. And I'm really worried about that. Like, I'm extremely worried she'll end up like Gideon, where she doesn't actually accomplish anything during the big confrontation and she'll just die. Similarly, in this story, it's revealed that Urza had a backup of the legacy created. I don't think it was like actually the legacy. I think it's just the knowledge of how to make the artifacts. It was weird. There's a demiplane stored in a ball that he pretended that he didn't want Teferi to have, so Teferi would want it. It was weird. Anywho, I'm worried that this isn't going to come up again. Just like, how the Weatherlight ultimately proved to be ineffective and failed miserably in Dominaria United, I'm worried that this new version, the backup of the legacy, I'm worried that won't it'll either be completely forgotten about, or if it is brought up, it just won't be impressive. Similarly, I don't think there's a single person who read this story or the previous one who actually believes that the Sylex will be what defeats Phyrexia. I don't think there's anybody who read all the effort they're going through to make the Sylex work. Nobody believes it. It's going to be something else. The Sylex will fail, and it'll be some other crazy nonsense that'll defeat New Phyrexia. And that, I've had a lot of time to think about it, so I think that's everything, both good and bad, that I think is worth mentioning. Now, overall, I give The Brothers' War a rating of 4 out of 10 in terms of quality. It's not great. Hell, it's not even good. I don't even think it's okay as far as Magic's story goes, and in terms of fantasy in general, it's kind of bad. But, despite that, it's clear to me that the team working on this story wanted it to be good, and to that end, they managed to make something that was far, far more enjoyable than a lot of the recent entries. Magic's story still has a very long way to go before I can ever call it good. But, just like with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty's story, The Brothers' War has me hopeful that things will start to improve. Thank you for listening in to my random ramblings about the story. I hope you guys have an excellent Halloween evening, and I will catch you in the next video.